Have you ever had any of those?
Oh, brother. I'm acutely aware, Charlemagne, that I'm a black person, just as you are a black person. And when Joe Biden insulted you by saying,
if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
How dare this guy come in here and insult you, a black man, and tell you you got to think a certain kind of way? I'm amazed that you weren't mad about that.
I'm not going to say it upset me, just like I'm not letting you upset me.
This guy has made all sorts of insulting things to black people, and his policies right now are hurting black people. Inflation hurts the people at the bottom more than anything else. Letting a bunch of illegal aliens into the border are hurting black people more than anybody else, as I said earlier. He's opposed to school choice when he has his own kids in private school, and we lost a year, almost 2 years of in-school education in California because of COVID that he supported. I mean, this guy has done monstrous things to black people, and then for him to come in here and tell you how you ought to think as a black person, that blew my mind.
You haven't heard already, your replacements are here. Anybody seeing this video, I want you to look into what happened with a huge meat company in America. They fired 13,000 employees and said they're going to replace a lot of their employees with asylum seekers. So when people were saying that the government may have been allowing migrants to cross that border in order to get cheaper labor, it's actually coming to fruition. They're saying that they're going to pay these asylum seekers, they're going to hire 42,000 asylum seekers, and they're going to pay them $16 an hour and also pay for their lawyers and everything to help them gain citizenship. Now, this will be a huge savings for Tyson Foods. But the question is, will other companies take notice of how Tyson Foods just saved a bunch of money? Think about that. If you can replace your workers with people who have been working for maybe $2 or $3 a month from their country, so $16 seems to be a lot, right? Your company could save over billions of dollars. This might not be the first company to pull this stunt in America, guys. So I say this to tell every single American in this country right now, make sure you have a way to provide for your family that does not involve you checking into an employer. You need to create something for yourself right now.
When Donald Trump gave his wall speech, you knew it didn't take him long to try to pimp black people. Press play.
But all Americans are hurt by uncontrolled illegal migration. It strains public resources and drives down jobs and wages. Among those hardest hit are African Americans and Hispanic Americans.
The question is that true? Joining us right now is Dr. Carol Swain, author of Debating Immigration. She says that is the case. Dr. Bill Spriggs, an economist, professor at Howard University, also chief economist, AFL-CIO, different perspective. So, Carol, I'll start with you. You say Donald Trump is correct that illegal immigration hurts black people?
I've been saying that for years. I wrote my first published a book with Cambridge Press in 2007. And one of the reasons that I published that first book was because the black leaders were not speaking to the facts. When you have a oversupply of labor, surplus labor, it hurts blacks, poor whites, as well as Hispanics. Anyone that has a low wage, low educated worker, they are hurt by the competition.
Example. When a Best Western hotel in Virginia came under new management, the managers began systematically replacing the hotel's black housekeepers with Hispanics. The replacement began when existing employees were told they would need to reapply for their positions after the management change. Subsequently, blacks with years of experience were denied reemployment. Hispanic workers were hired in their place. One manager expressed her preference for hiring Hispanics as housekeepers. You'll notice I used the word systematic in that last case because that's a very key word. This is not an accidental bias. Another example of something very systematic. When a warehouse in Memphis began using a new employment agency to fill its daily work crew, the agency, quote from the EEOC, essentially replaced the African Americans with Hispanics, end quote. Potential workers would line up outside the warehouse each day, but the agency would select Hispanics over blacks, even when black workers were farther ahead in line. Sometimes managers would send potential black workers home by announcing in English that there were no more positions. After the African Americans left, the Hispanics were allowed to come into the warehouse and work. Again, systematic, neither subconscious nor subtle. Perhaps the most egregious example of this comes from Prestige Transportation Services. It would discard or refuse to accept employment applications from non-Hispanic blacks. Quote from the EEOC, on multiple occasions when a black person applied for employment, prestige managers Ms. Ramirez and Ms. Rodriguez would stand behind the applicant and rub their hands on their skin to display their disdain for black people, end quote. Staff meetings were conducted in Spanish only, and one black driver who did manage to get hired would be sent home early while Hispanics continued to work. Now, I'm not going to read every case to you. There are 21 cases in the report. It would get a little boring, although I do recommend reading it because I think the repetition actually is instructive. You see the same things happening over and over again, which is telling. I do want to give you one more example. Most of the time, the low-skilled American workers who are discriminated against are black workers, but sometimes they're white as well. I want to give you an example of that. At a Hampton Inn in Colorado, 3 non-Hispanic white housekeepers were fired by the new general manager and replaced by Hispanics. The owners, Falgon Patel and Mukund Patel, told the general manager that they preferred that maids be Hispanic because in their opinion, Hispanics worked harder, while American employees are lazy. The general manager allegedly told a Hispanic employee to recruit friends for the incoming vacancies because the owners preferred a Hispanic workforce. After 3 months, all of the Hampton Inn's non-Hispanic housekeepers were gone. Now, there are probably some of you sitting there saying, okay, Jason, you call this qualitative research, but isn't that just a fancy name for a bunch of anecdotes? Well, I mean, I agree, there are a lot of anecdotes here, but I would say that the frequency and the consistency of these anecdotes is rather telling. I mean, to the point where you really have to be out of touch with reality to argue that there are no negative effects of immigration on Native workers. In fact, let me just repeat that, because I think it's a pretty important point. If you argue there are 0 negative effects on Native workers from immigration, then you are out of touch with reality. Furthermore, the types of anecdotes that we do not find are just as important as the type that we do find. I mentioned that there are many cases of Hispanics being preferred to black workers, but it was very, very difficult to find the reverse. Very difficult to find cases of blacks being preferred to Hispanics.
Nationwide, but you'd see a lot of it in large metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, but also in southeastern states, in certain industries, poultry industry, construction industry, so on and so forth. This was not a small displacement either. We had one witness who testified that after he had run the numbers, he found that 40% of the decline in labor participation rates among black workers over 3 decades was attributable to competition from illegal immigration. 40%. You did the math on that in terms of labor participation rate, you've got to do some joking with the numbers, but it comes to nearly 1 million fewer jobs for black Americans as a result of the competition from illegal immigrants. And it's not just the employment levels, it's the wage levels also. And I can only give you a few examples, but we had evidence from the Fed in Atlanta, which did a study on this, to show that illegal immigrants depressed wages, the competition from illegal immigrants depressed wages by $960 on average, but in certain sectors, such as the hospitality industry, the depression of wage levels was $1,560. When you consider what the wage levels are on an annualized basis, that's a significant amount of money. And because black workers were disproportionately concentrated in those areas, they were disproportionately affected.
All right, meat giant Tyson laying off 1,200 workers after closing its pork factory in Perry, Iowa, only later to announce 52,000 jobs for migrants.
The company's excuse, migrants are getting the jobs that Americans don't want. A human resources executive for the company telling Bloomberg the migrants have been, quote, very loyal. They've been uprooted, and what they want is stability. What they want is a sense of belonging.
Let's bring in Fox and Friends Weekend co-host Pete Hegseth. Pete, good to see you.
Yes.
But again, lower wages, taking American jobs. This was the reason why Democrats were opposed to illegal immigration 10, 15, 25 years ago. But here it plays out. This costs Americans a livelihood.
That's true. It was also the reason why the Chamber of Commerce crowd of the Republican Party was so resistant to Donald Trump back in 2015, 2016, dependent on importing cheap labor. He said, we're going to build that wall. We're going to stop this. I'm going to put Americans first. Wages will rise as a result. And now you've got an inversion of that with the Democrat Party saying, come on in. And then we've heard glimpses of it, right? When Nancy Pelosi said, who else is going to pick our crops, right? I mean, that's their mindset. And the businesses are happy to do it when there's no e-verifier, there's no consequences. And so cheaper labor for this business to produce a product. And it's not an easy job. You know, people that do those jobs, they're dirty, they're tough, but Americans should have the first shot, and they should have a good shot at a good wage.
And it's so dismissive. The language that they use, that Americans don't want these jobs. Really?
Americans had these jobs.
Right.
And they lost them.
Correct.
Exactly.
And if you thought about paying, if Americans are doing the jobs, they're going to raise the wages for the jobs, too. That's all good for everybody.
Yeah.
Shifting gears now to this, the Biden administration is sending an additional $25 million to Haiti as 80% of Port-au-Prince is now under control of violent criminal gangs. And now the White House is actively discussing using the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay to process migrants if Haitian refugees flee to the U.S. en masse. Pete, what do you make of this? Because, again, you could just pick apart the refugee part of how many more in.